churchyard. Now you can tell your friends that you walked all the way around old Edinburgh. They don't need to know that you mean the old part. That's only 1 mile long and 1/4 of a mile wide. They'll be very impressed with you going around the whole city. Now we are in suburbia of the old Edinburgh. Now in 1562 our city's graveyard was up at St Giles, but it was chock-a-block. There was nowhere else to bury anybody, and Mary Queen of Scots said move it out to suburbia, move the graveyard. So we did. This lower section all started up at St Giles. It's now a remarkably flat car park, so when you walk around it you'll see it. But of course that's why there's a lot more greenery here. Remember, we would have been at St Giles and that meant round by the toll booth prison. So there was a lot of unmarked graves at that particular grave in the city. And of course we were just round from the Market Cross, where most people got their public punishment. Yes, aptly placed, you could say, but only until 1562. Now I would say if we are wandering around in August, around about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, there was a Danish production company and they were filming a historical documentary. Now they were over on the far side there of this lower section of the graveyard. Now yes, they'd taken lots of film footage and you could hear all the cityscape around and the nature, the birds, everything. You could even hear the sounds they were making and the rustling of their movements. But then something else appears on a different level of sound altogether. Now that was very alarming. It picks up the words burned with them. Now I can't tell you if that voice was human, male or female. It's just words, and that was very bizarre. Now the reason we find that very eerie is because, well, in 1591 we had the worst witch trials Edinburgh had ever seen, the North Berwick witch trials, and that happened up at St Giles. Now before then, yes, we'd have plenty of witch trial or two, but 1591 does loom large in our legend. We might talk more about the North Berwick witch trials when they're locked in the dark. Yes, let's not forget John Gray. Well, I don't know if you've seen the little dog statue out the other entrance. We will leave that way so you'll get to see the little cute terrier. Now John Gray was his master. Now we've got a bothy over there and the windows are all the way around because you need somebody to keep watch of the graveyard. But more importantly, not so much to keep watch, but to listen out. And John Gray was employed by the graveyard to sit and listen out for the bells. The bells were something that were very important here in Edinburgh because, well, there would be a little contraption usually tied to the big toe of a corpse and it would hang high, and then above the coffin the bell would ring if the corpse was disturbed in any way. Now this could be a number of reasons why that would happen. So yes, somebody could wake from their coma. Yeah, we didn't quite know about comas yet, so this was something that happened. It was sometimes easier to get your hands on some whiskey and some fresh water, especially in winter time when you fell into a cataleptic state. Looked a bit too comfy for a few hours. With an impatient family, you could be buried alive. Now, of course, that may be the reason, but grave robbers looking for valuables and trinkets and such, they would tamper and move the body, and yes, that bell would ring, and John Gray could alert the authorities, and then all would be well. Well, they were loved by the Edinburgh folk, and they were street celebrities, for want of a better word, and everyone around fed and watered little Bobby the terrier. But the day that John Gray didn't wake up, well, Bobby stayed by his side for their journey. folks, we are standing around this. This is what you call a mort safe. Now, when we were talking about listening out for the bells, for example, this is something that was very important, especially in 1820s Edinburgh, because we had quite a problem with grave robbers looking for anything valuable that was buried alongside the body. And well, it was easy to do because they'd skulk around the graveyard and watch for mourners coming in. And if there was a mourner that looked like they were of money, there's a high chance of something valuable buried with the loved one. So a mort safe was what a family would pay for to make sure everything was still intact with their loved one. But it kind of shines a beacon that there's something of importance under there, doesn't it? I mean, let's be honest, any deterrent for a grave robber is a good thing because it is a hangable offence. But all you really need to do is pick a lock. And pick a lock two did in the 1820s, and they got down into a grave, and yes, they were in luck. There's a lady, she had jewellery on, in particular a ring. Oh, they don't have time to waste on a ring that won't budge. Out comes a knife, they'll just take a finger. Not even down to the bone, and she woke up. Yes, they'd saved her life. In fact, she lived for another 15 years. That was incredibly lucky. Can you imagine? Oh gosh. She was very lucky indeed. Not everyone was that lucky. I think if you were walking around the streets in Edinburgh in the 1820s, you'd also be very frightened of vampires. Yes, we were very frightened of vampires here in 1820s Edinburgh, but that was thanks to the rumour mill from the grave robbers seeing signs of movement. Yes, but what your family would do in that case was make sure that you definitely don't come back, because an 1820s vampire is going to come after their loved ones. So you're going to dig deeper, and that's quite a lot more money. Yes, and you can imagine in a place like Greyfriars, it's pretty jam-packed already, and it's pretty hard to get too far down into the ground. So there was a great amount of fear coming out of this graveyard. Well, we hope that's where the rumour of vampires came from. Who knows? Now folks, don't be mistaken by hearing the words about Burke and Hare being grave robbers. They are mistakenly called grave robbers all the time, but they were just serial killers, okay? Quite a difference. Now Burke and Hare were making quite a lot of money because they were selling bodies to the medical society. Yes, fresh corpses could get you life-changing money, and our anatomy lectures in the 1820s were the best in the world because of the fresh cadavers we'd have on the slabs. So, we know that Burke and Hare provided 16 bodies. We know that because they got caught, yes, for murder. Murdering people above the ground, and, of course, being recognised in those lecture halls. Where was the plentiful supply of fresh corpses coming from then? If they weren't coming from above the ground, they had to come from somewhere close. And in a graveyard, the bodies are too far gone. Well, there's a wee clue where we're going after the graveyard, folks. I might have said too much. The South Bridge, perhaps, maybe. Yeah, we've left the city wall. That is the Flodden Wall, and that was built all the way around the south side of the city after the Battle of Flodden in 1315. Now, well, take it as a compliment. We built up a wall around the south side of the city because we got a bit scared. We call it the thrashing of Flodden. But you know what? We didn't need a wall on the north side of the city because we had the Norloch, and that's where Princess Street Garden stands today. So it was quite optimistic calling that a loch, because that's where all the city's waste ended up. It really worked, keeping people out of the north side of the city. So we've just left Edinburgh. Now what does that mean? We're in the modern part of the graveyard. Yes, you see, we did expand the city for the dead, but not so much for the living. In fact, our city was getting tightly packed. 1 mile long, quarter of a mile wide, and our housing would start to get extremely tall. Yes, our tenements would sometimes try to reach the dizzy heights of 15 stories high, but that's not to say they lasted. Now, in close tenement living, it was always a very poor at the top and very poor at the bottom, and then of course you had your middle classes in the middle, and that would never do anyone any good, of course, if a case of the plague broke out, which it did, and it would occur in the city every 100 years or so. Our last big bout of the Black Death happened in 1645. Yes, that lasted for 3 years, and about, well, 3/4 of the city would have been wiped out. It didn't matter what class you were. My folks, we might have learned a lot from them, because you had a 12-hour window if you were lucky to alert the authorities that you had symptoms, or you'd come into contact with someone who had symptoms, and then you'd be taken out of the city walls. Now, just beyond here, on the city walls around here, there's an area called the Meadows. That's where you'd wait. Yes, there was big vats, and you'd have everything boiled, washed, and you had to wait until you were legally allowed to return into the city. Well, that sounds all right if you get that window of opportunity. However, if you are caught flouting, strung up in your doorway for all to see, well, nobody was caught flouting back then, I'm sure. We might be a bit more lenient these days. Do you know what the biggest excuse given to the police was for being caught flouting here in Scotland? Take a wild guess. Ghost hunting. Yeah. Well, I can assure you nobody was ghost hunting in 1645. Standing at it, it's the Dark Lord himself. Yeah, Thomas Riddle. Now, just so that you know, J.K. Rowling would walk around to get names for... Oh, is that good or bad? Ooh, sounds good. Or bad. Now, of course, J.K. Rowling picked lots of character names from the graveyard, and she's not the only author that's done that. Bram Stoker's, in fact, is well known for enjoying Edinburgh streets and possibly getting inspiration for Dracula. And it is said that when he wrote the book, he finalised Transylvania because it sounded more exotic. And of course they did have Count Vlad, which really helped. But Charles Dickens also liked to walk around a graveyard or two in Edinburgh in the 1800s. He liked the Canongate graveyard quite a lot. He also said of the Royal Mile, "I've seen much poverty and disease in 1 hour than I've seen in a whole lifetime." Oh, what a TripAdvisor review that would have been, eh, Charles? Offend anyone for a while. That worked, but just for a while. Peace doesn't last long. And then by 1671 we had an awful time. We nicknamed it the Killing Times. It's a bit like the witch trials, but picking people out for listening to sermons, even if they overheard them in passing. That was finding people guilty of treason. It was a very scary time, because should you just be honest and say that you had overheard them once, then you were guilty of treason, and the punishment would be death. Well, before that, we had the Lord Advocate George Mackenzie. He wanted to sort this out once and for all, gather the Covenanters together and maybe strike a deal so that something could be done and they could go back to living in some sort of peace. Well, they were going to strike a deal out at Bothwell Bridge, but a deal was not struck. Instead, it wasn't talks, it was a bloody battle, and lots of innocent bystanders were caught up in the battle. The Covenanters that were left standing. 1,200 of them were taken and placed in a prison like this, open to the elements. It was the field behind Greyfriars Kirk. This would have been full of pestilence, open to the elements, and many of them had come back with wounds, and some of them would perish in the days to come. Now, the ones that were still alive, all they had to do was renounce, and yes, they could walk free. But then it's quite difficult if anyone's going to do that and be called a traitor. So some of them stayed it out. Subsequently, some of them were taken out and publicly punished as a moral standing to anyone who was going to, well, do the same thing. And while this was all happening, by 1681, like I say, those picking people out in the street started to get worse. Two young women, not even the age of 20 years old, were picked on as a moral compass to everyone else. They were asked if they'd overheard sermons in the past, possibly even 3 years previous, and they were honest. They said they had. They'd only seen them in the distance, maybe overheard a word or two, but their honesty got them a date set for execution. They were taken to the grass market. Now, although a crowd had turned up, this time silence, because everyone there was scared, because anyone knew they could be next. And they watched while two young females who had been guilty of nothing but honesty were sent to be hanged. Now, Isabel Allison, she was the first girl. She decided she was going to start praying and singing and praying till her very last drop, and so she did. Then Marion Harvey, the reality set into what was happening. She was climbing the steps, looking at the faces around, and started pleading with them that she was not a murderer, she was here because of judgment. She'd been honest and she'd overheard a sermon. But yes, at some point she had taken solace in the Bible, and the Lord Advocate could see that the people in the grass market were being swayed her way. They were horrified by what was happening, and they said, "Throw her over." And she was. She didn't even get to the end of her sentence. The crowd gasped. Lord Mackenzie was now the most evil man in Edinburgh. And people have said that Marion Harvey may have cursed George Mackenzie, because when she was at the council chambers waiting to get brought to the grass market, she shouted, "I cup my blood unto thee, tyrant, Lord Advocate, bloody Mackenzie!" And 10 years later, he was dead. But we're going over to that cursed bloody Mackenzie right now. This is George Mackenzie's tomb. Now, there are rumours about what is in that tomb. I don't know if his family would have him buried in Edinburgh. I like to think this is just a memorial tomb, because I'm not sure, considering how we felt about him in death. But there have been incidences in the past where people have got in, and there have been many stories. One was that there were bodies, and another was just a body. So who really knows? I'm not sure. I wouldn't really want to find out. Now, going back to all those notions of curses on bloody Mackenzie, I have to say that it's always been something of a children's tale. They've come in since long ago in 1691 onwards. Little children would run into Greyfriars, knock on the door shouting, "Bloody Mackenzie, come out if you dare," and then run very quickly away just in case he did come out. Well, I have to say that you might look up anything about Greyfriars and see articles crop up about the Mackenzie Poltergeist. Now, this all started to come about in the 1990s. People would be walking around Greyfriars a lovely evening, some were walking dogs, and then of course some were found being, well, in various different parts of the graveyard, passed out. But it looked like they had asphyxiation marks around their neck. Now they weren't blaming it on anyone at the time because they said there was no one there. But people in the city started to get scared. Perhaps there was a predator in the graveyard preying on people walking around. Well, around the same time, the apartments behind this tomb started to show signs of what we would call poltergeist activity. Strange movement of furniture, electrical faults, and small fires appearing out of nowhere. Now, because of the location of the apartments and the activity, and because of what was going on in the graveyard at the time, well, it was blamed to one man only, the Mackenzie Poltergeist. It must be his energy, right? Well, regardless of that, the church started to exorcise the church and the yard every year. Now, we used to know when that was happening, but I don't know if you remember, some of you might, ghost hunting was all the rage in the 1990s. This place would be like a circus. So they started to keep it a secret. Yes, they do still exercise it at least once every year so that we can walk around in the knowledge that we won't feel a little tightness around our throats and in our chest, and things should be okay. Hopefully, right? You know, I have to say, I have experienced something right here. So a lady had a live picture. Now feel free to go and have a look in if you like. I can see they put more wiring behind that, so I don't know how much you can see, and it's just very dark. She took a picture with her camera phone, but it was one of the live images, so it moves. And then she played it back to us. Now, that was one of those grisly times that you only have 2 people on a tour. So there was just 3 of us. It was a cold December night. Yes. We looked back at it and something just walks past casually. Just a white figure just walks past the shop. I think I've beat my record. I ran out of here. So did they. But I didn't care how far behind they were. I was off by the top. We did make it to the vaults though, in record time. The cowgate, of course, was where you took anything agricultural and, well, the cattle as well. Now, it's vitally important as part of the city, so we needed a vital link from the Royal Mile down to the cowgate. And in 1785, the South Bridge was commissioned, and it would be a working bridge above the ground, below the ground, and through the ground. And that's where we'll be going. There's about 120 vaults in that South Bridge, but don't panic, I won't drag you in 120 vaults. Just a favoured few. Now, folks, we are going to go into a lovely tenement apartment, so this is where you're going to get masked up, and you'll get all your bearings when, oh, well, before we get into the
Sorry, Mum, it's me, it's not you. I lost my balance. I know, it's just so close together.
Bridge today, and you'll probably appreciate the decor. This is the kind of things that would be hanging around the market cross at St Giles for public punishment. Ooh. You'd probably like to know that the most popular item used was the thumb screws. That's in the middle. Yeah. There are also written accounts about those, saying thumbs popped. Ooh. Now folks, everyone's part of the fun. There's a children's version. It's right next to it. It's called the Pillywinkles. Now don't worry, we'll only do one thumb because we need those children for work. They're vitally important. And in fact, you'll see where we're about to go. So this is the South Bridge here, commissioned in 1785. It was completed in 1788. It's pretty impressive, the time scale it took to build all of this. A vital link from the Royal Mile up here down to the Cowgate. And we walked under that arch. And when we passed Bannerman's pub on the corner, they take up some vaults under the South Bridge. So they've got some vaults back here. And we walked up the steps to get to this apartment. We walked up steps on the other side of the bridge about here. When we're under the bridge, we're in this section here. So that will get you your bearings when you're in the dark. But right now we're just in a tenement apartment. And it was thanks to a group of students that of course lived here, and they were a bit curious. Of course they were. They knew there was nothing behind here but an old bridge. So what did they do? Break through into it. Now thank goodness they found a section that was currently disused. But they also found a part that had been filled in with rubble and bricked up since 1824. Now we will be going to that section under the bridge. We do encourage you to take pictures. Maybe don't look at them until we're outside. And well, what can I say? I mean, we're all masked up now, so we can't blame anyone on the tour for breathing on our necks or blowing in our ears. So that begs the question, who's blowing in our ears? This is what I call the safe part of the wind. So there's a little window and a little door. We step down, fantastic. Just have a look in the window. Yeah, so as I was saying, this is definitely the safe part of the line. So if anyone is feeling the need during the tour to run, I would say run here, the happy part. Yes, it was run by a group of what things belong to the true driving heaven, run by a man called George Cameron. Now he has passed away, unfortunately, but the Wiccans do still come down from time to time. You can still get a blessing down here. A blessing is a lot of word to take agricultural goods back and forth from the Cowgate running down that area back there and all the way up to the all-important Royal Mile, which is eventually up that way. Now, it would be very mucky down here, but because it was always underground, nobody really cared. We'd be walking on hay, straw, muck, sand. And because of the winding exits and entrances, there was no natural light. It was always very dark in a place like this. And because of the agricultural goods, it was prone to robbery. Now, we wouldn't send down the city's guard to a place like this, but we would send down the watcher. He was employed to walk the length and breadth of the wind and check on the vaults. He would be wearing a very long black coat, a very long black hat. You could probably make out his outline even in the dark. But he had very big, heavy boots. These boots were heavy because he had big blocks of wood nailed to the bottom. That was to keep him risen from all the muck. It was the only way he could make it through. But anywhere on the South Bridge you go today, you might hear the nickname Mr. Boots. That's the same man. Yes, people say you can still hear him walking, even today, like an echo from the past. And let's go into this first vault. There is a little step going down. Mind your footing. It is a little bit wet, but don't worry, it's just rainwater, not here. candle out of animal fat, but the light that came off was very dim, and it doesn't last for lots of point. Now, if you're down here, safety is always going to be an issue. These vaults go into each other. Once you're in one part of the bridge, you can pretty much get through everywhere if you're small enough. Because if it doesn't have a little doorway like that, it might have a little cutout in the ceiling or on the ground. These are very small. Merchants would use children quite a lot to go down to the bridge and retrieve any wares. So of course, you could buy a child very easily, send them down to the bridge. The worst part is if the child yes, the moral of that tale is life on the bridge didn't mean anything for anybody. So we will remember that as we make our way right up to the top. Now I will say, if you're blessed with height, mind your heads. Now, by the way, if we get a fright up the top here, we used to be able to run through to the Banshee Labyrinth pub. Yes, the wine and the vaults run right the way through it, but it's still closed because of restrictions. So we'll just have to face our fears. Now, I can tell that one of my colleagues has had a fright up here because usually the candles are lit, but I can see there was a candle placed there so that someone can do a quick exit. So I think there's already been a little fright up this section of the mind, which I'm a little bit nervous about, to be honest. Now, folks, if you hear any nicknames about the bridge and the Cowgate, you might hear the nickname Little Ireland. Now, that was due to the amount of Irish coming over in the 1820s for work. There was a lot of building going on at the Cowgate, so this is where they would frequent largely. Now, remember, we spoke briefly about those two very famous Irishmen, William Burke and William Hare. Remember, the serial killers? And we talked about the fact that they were supplying the medical society with fresh corpses. Now, we did also discuss how there was a plentiful supply going there, so where were the rest of the bodies coming from? Well, unfortunately, we are here, the South Bridge. Remember, if you were homeless and you were deemed to be living in these slums under the bridge, you weren't registered. And that meant, as long as you keep out of the eyes and the ears of the authorities above, you didn't exist. Oh no, hey, I'll send you first.
I know it.
Are we alone? I don't know what I'm more scared of, because it is a pandemic, so I might be more scared of meeting a random human than a guest. Grim reality, when you leave the bridge on the Cowgate end, you can put a body into a barrel, roll it out, and you can get to Surgeons Hall before rigor mortis sets in. It's incredibly easy, and that's the grim reality of where all those bodies were coming from in the 1820s to supply those great anatomy lectures. Now, no one would question where a body came from and why it was there and who it was, and it didn't matter the state of the body either. I find that quite sad, but then I think we're all very grateful, to anyone's contribution to medical science, because, well, remember, by the 1820s, people were still being buried alive. By the end of the 1820s, we started to find out about comas, So we're very grateful, very, very grateful. When we do get he said it was very nice and airy, and it didn't work out because the Wiccans didn't want to be here. They felt incredibly uneasy, and they felt there was a dark presence in this vault trying to make them leave. Now they didn't stick around to find out what all that was about, and they left. And they were quite happy in the vaults down the line that we just saw earlier. And wherever they go, they always have a circle of protection in place. We placed heavy boulders around that circle, but these boulders are from way beneath our feet, and made of the foundational bricks of Nicholas' house. In fact, we're surrounded by the bricks of Nicholas' house because after it was demolished, thanks to the request of his once best friend, King James, 6th of Scotland, 1st of England, well, what a strange request. Demolish somebody's house. What was in that house? I wonder that he didn't want us to find out. Perhaps it was true, the rumours between King James and Nicola Edwards, that they had been part of a secret sect dabbling in the dark arts. Now we know that both were instrumental in the witch trials. Both would personally get involved in the questioning, and this was something that wouldn't have stood well for the king, especially having put us all through the worst witch trials in history and then ending up in his own witch trial. So I think whatever was in that house was quickly hidden away. Going back to those North Berwick witch trials, the reason it is called the North Berwick witch trials is because it was down to one lady's confession that so many were burnt here in Edinburgh. You see, when the coastal townspeople were rumoured to have been using sorcery to sink the ships of King James and his new wife Anne of Denmark, coming into Edinburgh, those choppy seas weren't just by chance, no, that was sorcery, jealousy, that's what that was. But to find out if, of course, and there have been any facts in that case, I know that to be questioned. But to be questioned, they had to be tortured. And when they were being tortured, they were writing anything, saying all the right things that they thought they wanted to hear to make whatever they were going to do stuff. And Agnes Sampson was hailed as a ringleader because, yes, she was a lady from North Berwick, but all she'd ever done in her life was help people when they felt lonely. So she must have links with the devil himself. She was taken aside. Her torture was barbaric. People were questioning why she's still alive. It's the devil keeping her alive. And it wasn't. It was just a very skilled torturer, because that was their job anyway. They can't kill their victim. They'll fade up for the chopped neck. Agnes Sampson is starting to confess and confess she does. She says a bit too much. In fact, her confession is reading like the sublime to the ridiculous. And King James smells a rat. He said, no, I don't believe this. I need to be convinced, because this has to be true. Well, convince him she did. She told him of a secret conversation he'd had with his new wife Anne on their wedding night. The words spoken she could not have known. How we know that she knew this, we don't know actually. Was it sorcery? Was it pot luck? Was it something else? Who knows? But that one confession is everything factual. All the ramblings of the 100 strong that just wanted to end their suffering. That is just my colleague. I know that's the sign of the door. Now on that note, folks, what I am going to say is we are told not to let anyone step in that circle. It is incredibly dark. We're told it could have links to the time when Nicola Edwards was dabbling in the dark arts and carrying out his own witch trials on the grounds of his house, supposedly. Or it could be linked to 1996 when the Wiccans brought in a mirror and placed it over that passing through. Now, whatever the reason, well, people have left with scratch marks, burn marks, bruise marks, just from stepping in there, having a wee picture taken. Boom. Then hysteria breaks out. We're all running for the exit. Now, it's in the name of science and hashtag evidence. If any of you do want to step in there, I won't stop you. And be my guest. I am going to sound really creepy, though if you do step in there, check your body over. If you've got any strange markings, take a picture, send it in. We'll have a calendar by Christmas. Part of the bridge that was currently disused, the council grabbed it very quickly and started using it for something. And that something was acoustic practice rooms for bands. And that's why we've got stains written on the wall behind you there. Yeah. One of the members of Staines came on a tour with his children when he was older and wiser. And we asked him, what was it like? And he said, you had to retune our instruments all the time. They didn't stay in tune ever down here. And then, of course, they would go out and they would hear people walking and they'd think it was another band coming in and then realise there wasn't nobody there. So these little creepy incidences we can all relate to, and these all happen to us from time to time. But it doesn't take away the fact that even from its grand opening, perhaps this South Bridge was destined to fail. You see, we did have big plans for its grand opening in 1788. The eldest lady of the city was going to be taken along in a horse and carriage. Oh, that's lovely. But then, 2 days before the event, she passed away. What? Suddenly? It's too late in the day to change plans. She can still be the first lady across. We'll just have to pay her coffin, okay? So we opened it with a funeral. Now call us superstitious, and we are superstitious here in Edinburgh. We think we might have cursed the bridge forevermore. Yeah, but it can't take away some very grim incidences that have happened, and especially through the 1820s, we've got some criminal records. And it details incidences that have happened in the South Bridge. And in those incidences, we can tell where it happened and what the vaults were being used for at that time. In fact, the vault we're going to next is a very grisly incident from 1823. And that was also the vault that was still in trouble and picked up in 1874. That's where we're going next. It's the big dark one that we passed on the way up, folks. There are 2 vaults at the back there. The one down below is covered up. It's a very large vault, very deep and long, but it is packed full of junk. The one up top, we've got some steps, and if paranormal groups or donkeys or anything comes down, any equipment, you can stick it up there and it's out the way. Well, Joe Swash was down filming many years ago. It was a documentary for BBC Three called I Believe in Ghosts. Now, he was supposed to stay up there the whole night. He managed less than 3 hours. Hey, listen, that's commendable. I don't think I could even do 3 hours. He did have some recording equipment with him. Now, at the time it picks up, we'll get him later, tell you. It does pick up all the sounds from the pubs and the clubs around. And then it also picks up the noises he's making. And then picks up mind that it's very basic down here. We don't have anything set up. So, going back to what this whole section was in 1822. This whole section was being run by a self-bridge drinking tavern, basically, run by a lady called Mackenzie Poltergeist. She was the landlady. She'd kept a little book with important people's names in it that she'd served locally. I guess it was one of those relationships, I'll keep your secret if you keep mine, if you catch my drift. And all was well and jolly in the tavern under the South Bridge. Well, that was until one night, maybe it wasn't at her beloved tavern. She'd gone to a neighbour's house instead. When a little ruckus had broken out in the tavern and some of her regulars had drank too much. People that probably should have known better than to be in a place like this. A writer, a clerk, or whatever happened, both were fatally wounded. Maybe it was taken to a panel, plead not guilty for murder. She had no idea how the man got stabbed. Why is she being asked how they died? Why is she being asked if she was guilty of murdering two of her regular drinkers? The worst part about this story is that witnesses were brought forward to the court. They started telling in great detail how they saw Marie defend herself. Defend herself from the two men whom she stabbed. Well, that was a lie! Thanks very much! She is taken off to the grass market. The grass market fell silent, and they watched Mary hang for the murder she had committed. Shocked, this could happen. She was then taken along to get dissected in front of a whole bunch of anatomy students. Nice! This ceased to be run as a drinking tavern for some time. And then we knew it was little more than an underground graveyard moved into the one above the ground, but hey, this is the one under it. Thanks to what happened in 1824 when a fire broke out in Kirk, the dry goods burst into flames. The authorities came down afterwards to see if there was any survivors. This area looked like a mound of bodies, piled high, some in barrels waiting to get taken off to see what monies they could get. They said they must remove what was in this part of the mine. They said they can't imagine anything like this being left without a cause. They removed and placed in the last one. They thought that it was lucky and they were able to deem that it must be cursed. Why are we all still standing in it, folks? Oh gosh, I'm all jumpy now. Enjoy what you get on tonight. Enjoy.